Okay, thank you very much. It's great to be here with you today, and I very much appreciate being invited to speak at this conference. Uh, and my topic, as you can see, is AI in the military domain, ethical risks and opportunities. Now, I was asked to. Okay, that looks better, I hope. So the just to get started, a few words about myself. Well, I was born the same year as AI, which I think most of you know is 1956, the famous Dartmouth College seminar, where the pretty much launched the discipline. I'm a philosopher specializing in military ethics, both in contemporary issues and in historical perspective. I haven't been working on AI related issues all that long. It's been about 3 years now, and I'll just briefly tell you how I came into this. I'm a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, which is one of the academies at the Vatican. And a call went out for asking for ideas about a conference that was planned on robotics and AI. So I sent in just a suggestion, really, that the impact of AI and robotics in the military domain should be considered on the program. And then I got soon thereafter saying, really good idea. How would you be interested in co-organizing the conference? Now, this put me into a rather stressful state of mind because I really didn't think I knew anything. Well, I didn't know very much about the subject matter at all. But somehow I ended up saying yes. And it turned out to be a fantastic but steep learning curve for myself. We went ahead and did the conference. I think the conference was a big success, and a volume resulted from it. I can just show you that now. Robotics, AI, and Humanity, Science, Ethics, and Policy. And you can see that the lead co-editor, Joachim von Braun, is actually at the University of Bonn. He's a specialist in innovation economics. And following up on the conference, the volume examines AI from both the basic science behind AI, what the current frontiers are. Then we also look at the implications of AI within medicine and healthcare, employment, transport, manufacturing, agriculture, and armed conflict. There's quite a bit on robot-human interaction and affective computing. There's also a chapter on implementing robot-human joint action, and there are debates on whether machines can have consciousness and rights. The volume is open access, so please have a look at it. I was really surprised. I went to Springer's website this morning, and they say that there's been 40,000 downloads. So there appears to be a lot of power in open access. All right, well, since taking part in the conference, helping to put together conference, and then of course the book, I've managed to get 2 projects funded relating to AI in the military sphere. And this is what I'm focusing on primarily now. I've got we refer to the 2 projects as the big and the little project, because one is a 4-year project. It's called Warring with Machines, Military Applications of Artificial Intelligence and the Relevance of Virtue Ethics, which is funded by the Research Council of Norway. Then we've got a second project, which we call the small one because it's fairly short term. It's called Al Gore Ethics in the Emerging Battle Space, and that's funded by the Norwegian Ministry of Defense. I was telling some colleagues about the second project, in a meeting, and these were not people who are working in this domain at all. And after speaking for just a little bit, one of the colleagues said, but what does this have to do with the former US vice president? Al Gore. All right. Just a few words about each project. All right, the Warring with Machines project aims in 3 settings to yield moral guidelines for AI technology use. And the 3 domains are kinetic combat operations, physical warfare, cyber operations, and then strategic planning. And the idea is we want AI is being used in each of these 3 domains, and we'll touch on this as we go forward in my talk. And our idea is to propose guidelines that will serve as conceptual pillars for forming policies that can help guide the design and use of AI-related weapon systems. And then we, as a theoretical framework, we work within the context of what's called virtue ethics, namely focused on the inward capabilities, the virtues that empower us, people who are practitioners in the military sphere, virtues that empower us to act responsibly amid the challenges of personal and professional life. Warring with Machines will probe how we can enhance the moral agency of combatants as algorithms become more prevalent in warfare. So, of course, virtue ethics is, it's a perspective that's being put to use a lot nowadays in, of course, nursing, for example, a number of different fields, medical ethics, generally, the medical field, nursing, but it also has quite a large presence in the military sphere. And the idea, behind the project that we promoted, if I can put it that way, in the application, is that there's been a tremendous amount of attention paid over the last years to lethal autonomous weapon systems, so-called killer robots. But there's the field of the AI applications for the military domain go far beyond autonomous robots. And there's a lot of attention, and in fact, it's here that we see the most actual developments. They're in what we call hybrid intelligence within the military domain, human machine interaction of different sorts, and we're going to be talking about that as we go forward. So that's where we wanted to focus on in the project, and in particular, we wanted to look at how AI use, I include robotics within that, how AI use impacts on the people who are using these new technologies. Do they enable people to act morally in battlefield settings? And by morally, I mean in conformity with recognized laws of war. Or do they hinder people? Do they detract from the ability of human beings to act morally in battlefield settings? And there are discussions about what's referred to as de-skilling, worries about when people rely on machines, they lose fundamental skills that are needed to operate effectively in whatever setting. So that's the what we call the big project. Then we got a smaller project called algorithmics. And here we're mapping current AI-based technologies that are designed to enhance the effectiveness of military personnel in combat settings. We outline criteria that enable discernment of the ethical challenges posed by these technologies. We're going to issue some recommendations regarding ethical norms to be followed by military personnel who employ AI-based tools in battlefield settings. And we also examine how AI-based military technologies are being used nationally and internationally by highlighting the regional actors and their influence on the ethical discussion on technology development and use. All right, so there's some major military powers that are investing heavily in AI military technologies. The two leaders are China and the US. And ethics discussions are part of that equation, and I'll come back to that in a bit. All right, just to get started, I think it's worth reflecting a moment on, like, what is AI? And as a newcomer to the field, I've really struggled with this. Well, we know that the term was coined by John McCarthy in 1955. It was in a grant proposal to the Rockefeller Foundation. And the proposal was funded, and that led to the famous 1956 summer seminar at Dartmouth. And McCarthy used the term artificial intelligence in that grant proposal. It's quite extraordinary the impact that one grant proposal had. All right. Well, what's AI? Well, there have been lots of different definitions proposed, and I'm not going to propose a definition, but let's just say this can be a kind of hook to organize our thinking about it. AI designates cognitive functions implemented by machines to carry out human designated tasks. Right. These functions simulate capabilities, including perception, memory, reasoning, problem solving, planning, deciding, language use, and transfer of knowledge. And these are capabilities that can be found in humans and other animals. Artificial does not mean fake, but human-made. We talk in English, artificial can have sometimes a kind of a derogatory meaning, and oh, that's really fake. That's fake leather. That's a fake Gucci bag, So artificial is a bit like knockoff, but it's not meant in that way. It simply means human-made, a product of art, of human industry. Intelligence does not refer only to higher level thought processes. As when we refer to someone with, a high IQ, high intelligence quota. Although that is what AI systems originally were made to emulate. But the more recent focus in AI research is on replication of sensation and perception. For instance, computer vision based on machine learning techniques. Think about driverless cars. It doesn't take that much intelligence to drive a car. I mean, you don't have to go through years of study to do that. Maybe I should have. People complain about my driving, but anyway, but you know what I mean. I think that artificial cognition would have been a more suitable label because, well, cognition's a broad term. It can cover everything from lower order sensation all the way up to high level kinds of thinking. But the acronym was already taken by AC batteries and air conditioning, right? So you could see the value in going for AI instead of AC. But I'll note that Wolf Singer, who is one of the contributors of the Springer volume I mentioned, Wolf Singer, who at the Max Planck Institute, he's wrote an essay for the volume entitled "Differences Between Natural and Artificial Cognitive Systems." And I think that's a good way of putting the point. Finally, I'll note that AI is an umbrella term. It does not refer to one specific technology, but a basket of technologies. And I'm sure most of you are aware that the main types are, well, knowledge representation or expert systems. Those were the first to be developed in any detail. Machine learning, and then Bayesian networks. And if you want to read a book that goes into the history of AI and spells out the different developments, it's a great read, is Niels Nielsen, The Quest for Artificial Intelligence. All right, what does AI have to do with war? Well, a lot. And the impact is growing. China and the US are now engaged in an AI-enhanced weapons arms race. Just recently, the US National Security Commission on AI has just finished its final report. was issued a few months ago. And the report, co-chaired by Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, and Robert Work, a former Marine and Deputy Secretary of Defense, that shows you that this is not just military folks. This is also folks in the civilian AI sector, and at a very high level are engaged in these issues. Among the recommendations of the report that we can read, establish the foundations for widespread military integration of AI by 2025. All right, that's within the 5-year window that we're talking about, in the conference. Invest in next generation capabilities. Design innovative warfighting capabilities. China is less transparent, if I can put it that way, about its ambitions in the military AI domain. However, China has established, this is publicly announced, a doctrine of civil military fusion for the IT sector. They want all work in the IT sector is supposed to feed into work that will also be of benefit to the China's security situation, including military. And one thing we're looking into in the Al Gore Ethics Project is whether China's doctrine of civilian military fusion provides it with a decisive edge in the AI weapons arms race. Because as we know, in the US, there are quite a few high-level AI engineers who are reluctant to work on military applications. The staff at Google, for instance, came out against working with the US military's Maven system. I'll note that the European Defense Fund earmarked some of its 2021 to 2027 budget to address disruptive technologies and high-risk innovation. And they've approved a preliminary blueprint in 2019. It aims to promote and coordinate AI innovation across member states. So the EU is moving into this domain as well. All right. What are the perceived military advantages of AI? Why do they think this is something so important to invest in? Now, here are some reasons. Well, AI can expand missions in settings where remotely operated attack platforms are uneconomical or unfeasible. We've all heard about drone missions being flown in places like Afghanistan. Most of these missions, up until fairly recently, have been remotely controlled by human operators. So in the US case, it's human operators sitting in Tampa, Florida. There's a major base there. But this is really costly because it sometimes it's not just one operator. You need several to be sitting there operating the unmanned aerial vehicles. So there are good economic reasons to use AI to carry out missions in autonomous mode, that is without a direct remote operator. And we're going to come to that in a moment. All right, so there are economic reasons, but there are also other more practical reasons for wanting to use AI. So for instance, radio transmissions are very difficult or even inoperative at deep under the surface of the sea. So there too, AI can be very helpful in enabling an unmanned submarine to operate in autonomous mode in areas where you really can't get a remote operator. Also in conflict settings, bandwidth is extremely contested. First of all, the bandwidth can be intruded on, but also you just don't have a lot of it. So there too, it can be beneficial to have AI enhanced weapons that can operate in autonomous mode. Well, another reason is to replace humans in carrying out dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs. I was at a dinner a few years ago and was seated next to a Norwegian military person, and we got to talking about what he did. Well, he was a bomb diffuser, training people on how to. In this case, he was had been in Afghanistan, training members of the Afghan military to defuse bombs. And well, he said, you know, when you're teaching someone how to do it, you know, that you can get just so far with talk. At some point, you got to do it. And he said, you know, there's a day when you're training someone, you've got to go to a live bomb and you've got to stand there while the other person diffuses that bomb. And he said, you get to a point where there's a choice between two wires. I don't know, the green and the red. And if you cut that wrong wire, it's all over for you. And I can assure you that the person I met and then the one he was training, they would have much preferred not to be standing at that bomb and to have had a robot do it. That would just be an example. All right. Now I got a third point here that might surprise you. I don't know. Promote better conformity with laws of war. There are some people who have argued that human combatants really can't be trusted on the battlefield to adhere to fundamental norms. And we know of all sorts of atrocities that have happened. And they think that you might be able to construct a robot and program it so that it could operate on the battlefield with better conformity with recognized norms. And there's a growing area of ethics programming, including within military settings, ethics programming for artificial agents. All right, augment human decision-making through teaming with machines, hybrid intelligence. There are some tasks, and I give an example of analyzing surveillance footage, which is very hard for human operators to sustain over a lengthy period of time. And you can get distracted, and you're both trying to observe and also analyze. It can be beneficial to share tasks such as that with a machine. So each one does what it can do well. And in any way, it frees up the human operator to concentrate on what the human operator can do well. Then AI can replace human decision-making in settings where the scale and speed of interaction surpass human ability. All right, so we've got a whole set of new weapons or weapon systems that are coming into play. There are hypersonic weapons. You've got robotic swarms. Not just one drone flying, but lots of miniaturized robots that are flying together in formation. A human operator just can't assess that massive amount of data, and the speed of the interactions are too fast to maintain direct control over these sorts of systems. And so you need a way to replace the human decision maker with an AI decision maker. I was recently asked to be on a European Defense Agency strategic technology task force, a foresight exercise, looking at game changers and trends that will have an impact on defense, and looking at a long-term perspective of 20 to 30 years ahead, longer than the time frame for the conference. But they asked each of us to put forward some future scenarios. And here are two that I proposed, just to give you a taste for where things are headed. So I said, all right, when it comes to AI use, we can think about an optimistic future. Improved adherence to IHL, international humanitarian law, as a result of AI enhanced weaponry. Okay, so how could AI help promote this optimistic future? Well, the use of armed force can become more targeted, sparing non-combatants. Fewer military personnel get killed because more autonomous machines do the fighting. The machine might be, when a machine targets a human being, the machine might be able to disable the human rather than killing him or her. It's not so easy in the heat of battle for a human being to aim at another person and to try to avoid killing that person. Less destruction of property will occur because through cyber operations, dual use infrastructures can be remotely disabled instead of being destroyed, and can be turned on again when the hostilities cease. And maybe even general nuclear disarmament will become an actuality because AI-enhanced detection devices will make it possible to verify rearmament programs at their very inception. So the countries that previously possessed nuclear weapons, this is, we're talking in the future, judged it possible to relinquish their weapons in the interests of mutual security. All right, that's the optimistic future. Here's a pessimistic future. Declining adherence to IHL. So hypersonic missiles will be used regularly. So no one is safe anywhere at any time. You're going to have a miniaturized missile that can be shot at high speed. Seconds from when it's launched, it will hit the target. And it can use advanced facial recognition technology. So in principle, no one's safe anymore. Government and military officials must live underground. Dependency on digital transmission become a major liability, as such systems are now at the mercy of hostile powers. They can always be they can be penetrated. All sorts of things that relate to that use bandwidth can be turned off, paralyzing all the systems that depend on them. AI systems now handle strategic decision-making, even with respect to nuclear weapons, making the possibility of catastrophic outcomes an ever-present danger. All right, the list can go on. The Outer Space Treaty has never been updated, so you're going to have satellites that were sent up as communication platforms that can also be reused as missiles. The moon can become a new set of militarized settings where weapons can be quickly made. Now I'm going to have to go quickly over this, but here are the main areas in where AI can have a utility in the military setting: mission planning, logistics optimization, intelligence gathering, observation and orientation. Say if you're in a urban combat setting, help you see around corners, have immediate contact with a satellite, see what's going on. Well, decision making, input to it, and then even with autonomous weapon systems, engagement of targets, hitting the target. Now, you've all heard about AI systems where the human being is in, on, and out of the loop. We talk about this in relation to driverless cars, for instance. Well, this is, of course, also being considered within the military settings when it comes to lethal targeting. Hence, we have discussions of what's called the killing loop. Some call it the targeting loop. The Europeans like the targeting loop, and for some reason, the Americans feel more able. I'm an American, but okay, but I live in Europe. The Americans speak of the killing loop. They don't like euphemisms as much as Europeans, maybe. And this is from a very good book on the topic by Paul Shari, Army of None. When I first saw that book, I thought it was about an army of nuns. But okay, but I have to keep reminding myself, it's not about the nuns, it's about none. An army of no human beings, mainly robotic armies. So Shari develops this typology, the killing loop. And basically there are 4 moments in the killing loop. It starts with observation. You're searching for targets. You're in a battlefield setting. You're getting orient. Well, you've detected some targets, you think. Then you got a decision what to do. Well, it's the engagement decision. And then finally, you've decided to engage, and then you engage. You act. You pull the trigger. So this is the full combat OODA loop. And as in driverless cars, you've got the possibility of semi-autonomous targeting loops, where the machine assists in detecting targets and then engaging with the target, carrying out the engagement. But it's the human who makes the decision to engage specific targets. So this is a semi-autonomous weapon system. Then we get, so that's a human being in the loop. Here we get a human being on the loop, supervised weapon systems, where the machine runs through the whole cycle, but the human being can intervene if necessary. So the you've got a remote operator, human operator, who's following what the weapon is doing and can stop it. But note, this can only work in certain settings. In other settings, for instance, swarm warfare, it's all happening too fast for the human being to be on the loop. So finally, we get the third, the third mode, full autonomous weapon systems, human out of the loop. The machine goes through the entire process, and the human cannot intervene in a timely fashion. So that's a fully autonomous operation. Now we could have a discussion of autonomous operations. This is a rather difficult area to kind of pin down, but machine autonomy can be defined as the ability of a machine to execute a task or tasks without human input using interactions of computer programming with the environment. Once activated, can perform some tasks on its own. Autonomous operations are a byproduct of unsupervised machine learning. And autonomy is of two basic kinds: autonomy at rest, which are basically software agents such as AI assistants. I mentioned Cortana, which is what used by Microsoft Teams. I keep getting messages from her. She's keeping track of my calendar. I don't know why I say she. I think Cortana is a woman name. I don't know. Sometimes she gets it right, what I'm interested in doing, and often she gets it wrong. And then we've got autonomy and motion, robotic agents, for instance, an autopiloted UAV. Now, there are lots of ambiguity surrounding autonomy. What is it really? And now I'm referring to machine autonomy. And usually this is discussed in relation to the three contrasting terms: automatic, which is a reactive system. Think about a landmine. A landmine has an input and an output, but it all happens reactively. You step on it, that's the input. The output, well, we know what that is. Then you get automated systems, which are deliberative systems. So a lot of the older air defense systems that have been in use since the mid-70s are deliberative systems. And then we get autonomous systems, which involve machine learning, unsupervised machine learning. All right, human-machine interaction. I'm really sorry it took me so long to get directly to this, which I know is our main focus in the conference. All right, first, I think this is an important point that's often overlooked. It's a fallacy that human-machine interaction is relevant only when humans are in or on the loop. Right? I suppose this is human beings being in or on the loop is human-machine interaction in the narrow sense of the term. But let's be clear, even a lethal autonomous weapon system, right now there are very few in operation. Some air defense systems have this characteristic of being fully autonomous. There is always someone who is put that system to use. Right? There's someone usually pretty high up in the military command structure who has made the decision, we are now going to turn on that system. So there is a human-machine interaction, but the interaction allows for the machine to operate in autonomous mode. But there's somebody, a human being who is in charge, who's made that decision. And ideally, well, not just ideally, but should be obviously turn it on, but also have the ability to turn it off. Autonomous weapon systems potentially include much more than killer robots. I mean, that's gotten most of the attention, but you can have autonomous decision-making right up the command structure. And so there are discussions now that you could automize nuclear deterrence launch systems. There already is, some are already automized to a degree, the so-called dead hand system, but they're not, certainly we don't have autonomous decision-making at that level, but we could, which would be much worse than killer robots. Already in operation are so-called loitering and related air defense systems. I've mentioned nuclear deterrence. There are discussions in Geneva, the UN, apropos the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. Should there be a protocol to prohibit the use of fully autonomous weapons? And a lot of this discussion, which involves states like the US, China, European countries, India, and so forth, the debate is very much around how to talk about human beings operating autonomous systems. Should we speak in terms of meaningful human control? Or should we speak in terms of appropriate human judgment? The US military prefers appropriate human judgment, which puts the focus on preventing misuse. Think about a command structure. You want people lower down in the command structure to do as they're told. The commander must always exercise appropriate human judgment. Meaningful human control puts the focus on safety, right? You've got to maintain control. That's a safety kind of term. Which takes me to two main ethical considerations in the context of AI military applications. And I'm going to take now, this is a very complex discussion. I'm going to kind of narrow it down to two main areas. Assurance of safety on the one hand and avoidance of intentional wrongdoing on the other. All right, let's start with safety. Now, it can seem paradoxical that military folks should have such an interest in safety, because you say, well, wait a minute, the whole point is to like bring harm on other people. But you want to do that in ways that are safe. So militaries have been concerned with friendly fire incidents where it all comes back onto one. I got my son yelling from another room, homeschooling. Someone's calling me. Just once. I'm giving a lecture. All right, it's terrible. All right, so there's been a huge concern within military organizations for safety issues. I mentioned friendly fire problems, but also they don't want harm to come to side effect harms to come to bystanders, chiefly civilians. So an accident is an undesired and unplanned event that results in a loss. Safety is freedom from accidents. And ensuring the safety of actions to be undertaken in military settings and other settings as well, is a key aspect of practical wisdom. Usually goes by the name prudence. Foresight, which involves foresight, circumspection, and caution. Right? So this is an ethical obligation. When in whatever we do, to try to foresee negative side effects, unintended side effects. And this is especially important in military settings where lethal harm is being brought to bear. And you want it to be brought on the specific target and not on surrounding people and things. Okay, now that's safety, but as a powerful tool, AI can be intentionally misused for wrongful ends, whether by deliberate misdirection, as for instance, when a weapon system is designed to target military personnel, is directed against civilians. That can easily happen. Or by malicious interference, is when a military adversary gains control of an opposing AI system through spoofing or other means and directs it against the owner. So now, not too much time left, but I'm going to, just a few minutes, I'll just quickly run you through this. AI accidents. There are certain risks here. First of all, AI reduces some errors. It reduces errors that result from human beings, our struggles with concentrating, if I can put it that way. Keeping one's eye on something for long periods of time can be really challenging. Think about people who are manning the security systems at airports, looking at screens. So AI use can reduce the sort of errors that arise from concentration challenges. But AI also amplifies other sorts of errors. And the problem here is that AI systems are often interlocking. So if an error comes into one system, it will very quickly interface with a whole host of other systems. And it happens extremely fast. So you can end up with an error ballooning and having very serious consequences. And in a military setting, this can lead to unwanted forms of escalation. Okay, misalignment of software and real-world tasks. The computer is a general-purpose machine. Used to be for every sort of thing you wanted to do, you'd have to build from scratch a new machine. And you'd get people who are specialists in that task designing the machine. Like if the task was, can be all the sorts of different things we want to build. You need a specialist who knows about that specific domain. But now that we've got a general purpose machine called the computer, you get people designing systems who are experts in software, but are not necessarily experts in the specific domain that the machine's being designed for. And the way they go about it is they bring an expert in the particular domain to provide input. But often the necessary safety requirements are not properly understood by the software designer. So the problem that arises is not one of bugs in the system, it's just that the system does not have the necessary safety checks built into it. When it comes to autonomous weapon systems, this misalignment can turn out to be extremely dangerous. And there's some authors, Richard Danzig, who is the US Secretary of Defense for a period, he's written a report entitled Technology Roulette, talking about the dangers of this misalignment and how serious it can be. Finally, we've got all sorts of problems arising from human AI miscommunication. At the beginning, the idea was to make AI look like a human thinker, to act like it, and it was going to replicate human thinking. But now we know that humans and AIs have different modes of thinking. So you shouldn't just try to think of them as that we should de-anthropomorphize our conception of AI and robotics. But this means that if we're different modes of thinking, the two need to communicate effectively. And here the more that AI is introduced into the military setting, and I mean, I've heard that Microsoft just received a huge contract from the U.S. military to build headsets for military personnel, which is going to provide them with a constant live feed. The two have to be able to communicate effectively. But let's say the communication is not effective. Either way, messages can be misconstrued. And this will be my time is really up, but just, there's a famous incident where this goes back really before the machine learning. There was a Russian officer who was part of a nuclear launch detection. He was at a nuclear launch detection base, and he saw his computer screen saying attack underway. And if he communicated attack underway, nuclear attack underway, if he communicated that to his superiors, they would launch a counterattack. And he went and checked. There were some auxiliary systems, and they all said launch underway. The backup systems. But there was like a bell going on in the back of his head that something didn't seem right. And he started to think just for a moment, why would the Americans carry out the launch in this way? First of all, there weren't enough launches to really make it successful, to make it work. So he said, why are there only 3 launches? If they're really mounting attack, there'd have to be much more massive. So he decided not to communicate this finding. And that very soon thereafter, it was figured out that there was a sensor that had confused a cloud formation with an incoming missile. So there was an AI, and what the AI communicated, the interface did not work properly. Right. So this is just an example to say how serious the miscommunication can be, the mistranslation. You've all seen, well, many of you have seen, I'm sure, the film Lost in Translation, but here it can take on a whole new meaning. All right, I've pretty much used up my allotment of time, and I've gone through my main points, so I'd be very happy to hear what thoughts, questions you might have. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very, very much for this very, very interesting and insightful talk. And we do indeed have some questions coming in from our YouTube stream. So let me start off with one of those. Regarding the arms race, is it possible in principle for one side in the race to focus on AI applications in order to counter AI-powered attacks? So in essence, focusing on the defense rather than to lead offensive operations? Or do you think that capabilities in defense and offense necessarily come hand in hand?
Yeah, that's a super question. I think the military think that you have to be able to engage in both. And part of the problem, or the challenge, if I can put it, is the issue of offense and defense can be considered from a strategic point of view and from a tactical point of view. From the strategic side, offense relates to who starts the conflict, who goes on, who attacks the other side first. But let's say one side attacks the other side first, is the aggressor, the one starting the conflict. And now a conflict is underway. Once a conflict is underway, the defender is not limited to purely repelling attacks by the other. Purely repelling attacks is never very effective. You've also, if you want to be able to prevail in a conflict, an armed conflict underway, you also have to be able to bring the fight directly to the opponent. You need to engage in some offensive tactic, offensive operations. But these are now offensive in the tactical sense. So simple answer, you need to do both. You're getting a parallel discussion in the domain of cyber operations.
Well,
all right. So, you know, and the conclusion seems to be strategically, one shouldn't engage in offensive cyber action. But once an interaction starts, one is again not limited to repelling, but one can also undertake actions that would aim to disable the incoming attack. All right. So tactically, they're off. Tactically speaking, they're offensive cyber operations. So, and some countries like like Norway, where I happen to be, they say that all segments of society, all who are involved in IT work, should think defensively, think defensive cyber. But offensive cyber can only be undertaken by designated personnel who are cyber operators nested in the military. All right.
Thanks a lot. I have another question from an ethical point of view, because as we've heard yesterday in some talks already, quite often we know for AI technology, particularly in machine learning, that we know mathematically, theoretically, that they perform extremely well, but we don't quite understand why they do certain things. So particularly in the military applications domain, how do you view this conundrum from an ethical point of view? Do we trust that we know they behave better than we could expect? Or do we still want to potentially sacrifice some of this optimality to gain more insight into what they are doing, to better understand what's going on?
Okay. I mean, I guess there are two parts to the answer. One part is it's I suppose you call it a kind of tenet, a principle of safety, sort of safety theory in engineering, that systems have to be operated in order to see where in order to really get a sense of where the safety issues are. So because in any system, you've got the designer's model. That's one thing. And it's an idealization. Then you've got the operator's model. The ones using it, they also have an image of what's going on. And there's a dynamic relationship between the two. So you can only really figure out where the boundaries of safety are by using a system. So you can't remain purely on the level of simulation. It's very hard to, and maintain safety. So this means that you got to get out there and practice. So that's why it's very important that AI be introduced within military training. And in fact, there needs to be interaction between the developers and the ones who are training with AI, because a feedback loop has to be established. So you can't just stay on the level of simulations. Now, there are some specialized areas where, well, you just have to do it that way. So for instance, nuclear weapons tests, there's a nuclear test ban treaty, and there are good reasons for that. But in other domains, the best thing is to get out there and train. And that's why, war exercises are carried out. And AI can only be a safe tool if the operators, which are going to be military people at the different levels of the command structure, it's only going to be safe if they've worked with the tool, they've trained with it, they understand how it functions. Okay, so that's one side. The other side is that there's been a lot of talk about AI black boxing. We don't know how AIs reach the decisions that they reach. But there's a lot of research is now directed at unblack boxing AI. And as part of my research group, we had a talk last week specifically on this explainable AI in military settings. So from what I can understand, and please don't ask me to repeat the specifics, but the progress is being made in tracing out and doing so in a way that quickly that's understandable by a human operator, how the AI has reached the decision that it reached. And so there are systems that relate to figuring out, it's called attention. You can figure out what a feature, on what basis the AI was focused, what features it focused on in making the decision that it made, a kind of feature selection. And then the kind of tree is built up around the features that it selected as relevant for its decision. And that can be displayed to the operator.